Think about how we actually learned in school. The teacher explains, you copy it down, you go home and memorize it, and then you write it back word for word in the exam. Whoever remembered the most got the most marks. And that's the real problem with Indian education system. It tests what you remember, not what you understand. Now, is this memorization, ratta maar problem only an Indian problem? Because that's not how it's always been. One of the world's first renowned universities was established in Bihar, India. And the ideal way of learning we are all talking about today, the critical thinking, the application-based learning, those ideas were actually born in India thousands of years ago. But we'll get to that later in the video. So, what went wrong today? Let's start by understanding where the modern way of schooling started. It started in Prussia. Prussia was a powerful old kingdom in what is today known as Germany. And in the 1800s, during the Industrial Revolution, Prussia needed a very specific kind of person. It needed factory workers, it needed soldiers, and it needed obedient citizens who would follow orders and not ask too many questions. So they built the world's first compulsory school system to mass produce exactly that. And from Prussia, this idea spread everywhere. The British brought their own version to India. In 1835, Thomas Macaulay openly wrote that he wanted to create Indians who were Indian in blood, but English in taste and thinking. In simple words, he wanted clerks and translators to run the paperwork of the British Raj. So from the start, the schools in India were literally set up to mass produce obedient office workers. And then we wonder why we don't have innovators. But to be fair, almost the whole world is running the same 200-year-old factory design and calls it schools. Which brings us to the real question. If everyone is using the same system, then why does India's one feel so much worse? Well, that's because many countries have slowly tuned their education system more towards understanding rather than remembering. Take Singapore, for example. On paper, it looks just as strict and exam-heavy as India. And for years, it was infamous for sorting kids into streams from a very young age. But Singapore saw the damage that labeling does and has spent the last few years tearing that system apart. They also kept updating what's taught so it matches the real world, and they pushed the kids to apply the ideas instead of just repeating them. Now, some people might say that it's a small, rich country. Okay, so let's take a look at China then. On the surface, China looks like the ultimate rote learning nightmare, dominated by the brutal Gaokao exam. But if you take a closer look, all that drilling is actually teaching them the logic. While India's system rewards you for remembering textbook definitions, China's system forces you to master the core logic. How so? Their exam questions. Their exam questions are designed in a way that you cannot simply pass just by vomiting out formulas. Also, by teaching complex science in native Mandarin instead of forcing kids to learn it in a second language like English, they cut out the cognitive friction. Implementing something like this in India is not possible because we will never be able to agree on which Indian language to use. The one country that provides the most comprehensive education is probably the United States. And look, the American system has plenty of its own problems. But a kid there is more likely to be asked for their own opinion, to do projects, to write essays and argue their point, to express their individuality, and to be graded throughout the year instead of just one do-or-die exam. And when we compete with them for a job, the only way to win is by asking for a much lower salary or by being a prodigy. Remember the irony I mentioned earlier? This holistic, curious, think for yourself kind of education that the whole world is suddenly chasing today? India already had it thousands of years ago. In our gurukuls and in universities like Nalanda and Takshashila, that attracted students from all over the world. Learning back then was about discussion, about questioning, about the student as a full human being. We were the ones doing it right, and then the British arrived. Now, here's where I'm probably going to annoy some of you, because so far all of this sounds like India just messed up. But what if the people who kept it this way were actually right? Think about it. There's 1.4 billion people in India. Grading against a templated answer sheet is cheap and fast. Grading essays and creative projects for that same number of students needs tons and tons of trained examiners that India doesn't have. The West can afford it because they have far fewer people and a much bigger tax base. India collects far less tax for the size of its economy, and only 3 to 5% of Indians actually pay income tax. So expecting a Finland kind of setup ignores the basic math. And then there is a second reason that matters even more. Fairness. An objective exam is very hard to rig. That's why some of the toughest Indian entrance exams, like the ones for the IITs, are actually respected around the world. Now imagine if those were subjective, graded on somebody's opinion. Every local politician and every rich parent would be pulling strings to bring up their kids' marks. The system we have today, for all of its flaws, gives the poor kid a real shot. You can out-memorize a richer kid. But the moment you make it about hobbies, projects, and networks, the rich family always wins. And there is one more truth we have to accept about ourselves. For most Indian families, education was never really about curiosity in the first place. In most Indian homes, it has exactly one job: study hard, get good marks, land a stable job, and then you know what comes next. That's why most Indians study engineering or medicine, because that's where the money is, at least in the Indian economy. India doesn't have industries that would make a degree in botany, for example, useful. So the system is not failing at its job, it's actually fulfilling the demand. And that's why it feels broken and works at the very same time. If you enjoyed this video, you will enjoy this other video on your screen right now. Try it out. I'll see you there.